here are a list of some of those reasons. There's always a few more that maybe aren't listed, but just as a regular landlord-tenant matters, private landlord-tenant matters, rent is always an issue. Obviously, in subsidized housing, you're paying a reduced rent, a lower amount based on your income, but you still have to pay that in order to remain in the housing. That is still a way they can file for an eviction. Other issues that come up that I see quite often, the failure to report income comes up a lot. One thing you'll see in subsidized housing, it's true in public housing, it's true if it's a private company that's running a project-based Section 8 voucher program or something like that, where you have to do a recertification, usually each year. And in addition to that, if your income changes more than $200, you need to notify the landlord so that they can do what's called an interim recertification. So if you fail to do that, if you don't report that income, that can become a problem. It can cause you to owe a retroactive amount of rent. If they think it was intentional to not report the income, then that could be the grounds for a lease termination as well. So also along those same lines, reporting who's living in the house. You can't have unauthorized people live in the house who aren't listed on the lease. You could always add someone to the lease or ask to add someone to the lease or to the household. You just really need to watch out for letting somebody move in who's not supposed to be there. They can also have an issue if you fail to accept a new lease. The big things, though, that really I see a lot are drug-related criminal activity and criminal activity that threatens the health, safety, and right to peaceful enjoyment. That is a language you'll hear a lot with these, and quite often the things that I see don't always involve the tenant themselves. It could be a member of the household. It could even be a guest who does something while they're on the property that can cause a lot of these problems. Abuse of alcohol. Usually these things, or some of these things like abuse of alcohol and these criminal activities, have to threaten health and safety or something like that. So there's a little more to it, but they do have standards, and they do sometimes review people for inspections on cleanliness and those kind of things. Those are probably one pet peeve of mine dealing with those, because there's a lot of times it's very subjective between whoever is doing the inspection on what it means to really violate that and not. Also, they can also charge you for other damages or things that are caused by you or a household member or your negligence. That could be considered a lease violation if you're not able to repay that or try to repay it, I think, in a reasonable way. There's a little, all these have a little more further details that can be gone into with each one. It's usually just not as simple, though, as, well, you violated something, you can automatically be evicted or whatever. The trash violations, things like that, anything that's a lease violation, and also can be lease violations that build up. Repeated minor violations, which would be something that you violate that's maybe a smaller thing, but then you keep violating the same thing multiple times. They could use that to try to do an eviction. But generally with these, what it illustrates is the idea that in order to be evicted from subsidized housing, usually you have to, the landlord has to have a good reason, what they call a good cause. They can't just evict you because the lease term has ended like they can in private landlord tenant. The only one where that comes up where they can do that is in a housing choice voucher, where you're leased with the landlord, you're treated like a private tenant, even though you have a voucher that's paying for part of your rent.